Alt-L, Introduction to Classes and Object-Oriented Programming. So in this video, we'll introduce the idea of a class as an organizing structure within a computer program that allows you to logically connect large chunks of code together reusably and in order to simplify the code structure. You may name classes after real-world objects, and this is named object-oriented programming. So we just have a few simple examples to get started in this very large area of computer science, just to the level where we would be able to use classes in our mathematically oriented programs in our Alt-L class. So here is example one. Right here, we are just making a very, very simple class, and we start with a few things to note. First of all, the class is a keyword. We don't use it for variables, and we start with the keyword class, and then the name of the class. This is sample class. There's a colon which follows, and everything that's in the class is tabbed. So these three lines are in our class, and we have only one item in our class, really, and this is a constructor. It initializes the class. And here we must note the init keyword, which has 2 underscores before and 2 underscores after. And the form of the constructor is a function within the class. It uses the specialized init keyword with the underscores and has a internal variable called self, which refers to the class. So init is a variable or a function within the class and is tied together with this self variable. So any function that you have in the class that contains the self keyword, well, that's a function in the class. So also variables within the class start with the self keyword. So every variable is prefaced with the self dot. And that also indicates that these variables belong to the class and are used within the class. So in this simple example, we just define 2 variables, var1, var2, with a integer and a string value, 5 and hello, and that's all. So we have a simple class which has 2 variables inside. Now, how do we use the class? We invoke the class we invoke it by creating an instance of the class. In this case, the instance is S. S is now a variable that represents an example of the class, sample class. So S is an instance of the class. And note that to call the class, we also use the name of the class and 2 empty brackets. In this case, it's a very simple class. We do not pass any arguments into the class. So now we've created an instance of the class, and we can access variables in the class using the dot notation. So S is all of the items in the class, and the dot allows us to access things that are in the class, and in this case, the 2 variables, var1 and var2, are the 2 items in the class. When you create an instance of the class, the constructor executes. So we might note this. This function executes when an instance of the class is created. So any of the code in the constructor will apply to any instance of the class. So now that we have an instance of the class, we can access the variables var1 and var2. And this example will simply print 5 and hello that we'll see over here in our output screen in the console. 5 and hello. So there is a very simple example of the definition of and use of a class. So in the next two examples, we'll build on our sample class. The first one here, example 2, we're going to include a separate function called welcome in the class. So we will just highlight in such a way, or we will comment out example 1 and uncomment example 2 here. And we have more or less the same code, except now we have a separate function. So welcome is a function in the class. And you'll note, just like with the constructor, the init, there's a self. So this indicates that it's one of the functions in the class. This welcome function has one line inside it. It simply prints a message. So this example is very similar. We print the two variables, and now we can also invoke or call the welcome function. So the output will be the same as last time, 5 and hello. And there will be the addition of this little message, welcome to the sample class. 5, hello, and welcome to the sample class. So there is the second example. Now we may look at the third example. Yet one more development. So in the third example here, we have an additional message, and we also pass in 3 variables, v1 for var1, v2 for var2, and then the message that we would like to display in our welcome function. So this one is an example of a class with 2 variables and a function now with some arguments passed in or parameters passed in. So we see here the construct, the init function has the self variable like usual, but now we also have arguments that are passed into the init function and 3 class variables, self.var1, self.var2, and self.message. They store the 3 variables that we have passed into the class. The welcome we see here, it has a little print statement that accesses the class variable self.message. So even though self.message is declared in the init, since it's tied to the self, which is the entire class, it's accessible anywhere in the class. It's like a global variable that can be seen anywhere in the class. So now when we invoke our class, we need to invoke it with the 3 arguments. The first 2 are the first 2 variables. The third one is the message. Again, we print and then we execute the welcome function. This time, however, the welcome function will print the message that we sent in to the class when we invoked it. And there we are, 5 car, welcome to the sample class and have a great day. So one final example, and this comes from an example that we did in one of my computer programming classes. It's called chess game. So in one of my computer programming classes, we used the chess game as an example for many of the constructs and ideas that we use in computer science. And this one is not a real chess game. It's just the simulation of the moves of a chess game with 2 players. And so we have a constructor, and we pass in the argument for the players' names, the arguments for the players' names. And again, note the use of the init keyword with the 2 underscores before and after. We Pay attention to the little details like the colons that come at the beginning of the class definition. And of course, for each function, the entire class is tabbed in. And in addition, for each function, all of the code in each function is tabbed in. And that's how Python is organized, with logical blocks tied to the tabs in the code. So this one has two additional functions: show players, which just displays the players' names, and run game, which runs a little game. There's a little additional detail here. We have this random function that's being called, and if you take a look right at the beginning here, from random import star, we are now calling up the random module or library, which allows for random number generation. So maybe another video will be a good place to cover more about that. Suffice it to say here that each time we call random, there's a number between 0 and 1, which is generated, a decimal number, a real number, or a floating point number, how your perspective might be. And so the actual game will go a little bit different each time. So there is a 2% chance at any given time that the game is done. And once the game is done, then there is a possibility that player 1 or player 2 wins, each with about a 30% possibility, and the remaining 40% goes to a draw. And so here's our chess game. How do we invoke it? First of all, we invoke an instance of the class with the two players' names. Then we run the two functions in the class. First, we show the players, then we run the game. Here's how the code goes, and this was a very short game. Only a few moves, and it was checkmate. Ted wins, the game is now done. Try that again, and it might be different. Ted still won, but it was a much longer game. And so there's the use of a little class. The class structure can organize our code, especially in larger and more complex programs. It becomes reusable code, and it will be very handy in organizing a number of mathematical and scientific programs. So this has been a little bit about classes to get you started, and hopefully you'll be able to apply these within the Alt-L class in your coding.